Welcome back to the Purple Brownie, where we look at strange civil rights cases that should have had a different outcome. We are your hosts, Mike, and Alex, or the MMA. Before we start today's episode, consider this question. Do you think mentally ill people deserve different treatment in the justice system?
Interesting.
Well, I think it depends on every case and every person. There is a spectrum of mental illness that I believe must be taken into account when considering sentencing and justice.
Facts.
Today, we're looking at the case of Cecil Clayton, a mentally disabled man who was given the death sentence for killing a police officer. A case that seems on the surface black and white, but there's more.
Very interesting. Let's do some digging.
The case of Cecil Clayton was much more gray than black and white. In 1972, Clayton lost 1/5 of his brain in a somnol accident when a splinter was shot into his brain.
Youchers.
So he had a hole in his brain?
Exactly. And the part of his brain missing was the frontal lobe, the part of the brain that controls impulses and decisions.
So that would have caused him to be much more prone to violence, right? And he probably wouldn't have had his intelligence.
Exactly. Before the accident, Clayton was a well-liked man with a family and even his own logging business. Yet, as time passed after losing that chunk of his frontal lobe, Clayton lost his business, his marriage, and his self-control. He eventually fell into a deep state of alcoholism.
2 years after his accident, Clayton checked himself into a mental health clinic because he was scared of himself and the horrible harm he could potentially cause to others.
Seems like a good idea, right? And I'm sure the doctors there took him seriously.
Nope.
Clayton was brushed away and received little to no help, even though there was clearly something wrong with him.
Wow. This really shows how the issue with mental health goes beyond just the criminal justice system. The clinic's decision to brush him off would result in the loss of a life.
So sad.
In 1996, 24 years after his accident, Clayton broke into a house, got into a physical altercation with the police officer who responded on the scene, and ended up killing the officer.
So he sounds pretty guilty of the crime.
He was, but that's not the issue.
So what is?
The sentencing.
When you incriminate someone, you must take the mental capacity of the perpetrator into account. This is especially true when it comes to sentencing someone to death. One must be aware of their crime and why they are being incriminated in order to receive the death penalty. Clayton obviously wasn't fully aware of his crime, as he was severely mentally damaged. His attorney requested a competency hearing to prove this, but was denied by the U.S. Supreme Court. This meant that Clayton's mental state would be considered irrelevant in the sentencing process. Ultimately, this led to Clayton being sentenced to death for his crime. This would be unconstitutional as it violates the Eighth Amendment, which implicitly says that it is illegal to execute someone who is severely mentally ill. But since no competency hearing was ever held, Clayton's mental state was never officially taken into consideration.
That's a lot of words. Pretty much, Clayton was mentally ill and the court didn't take it into consideration, making it easier for them to sentence him to death. An action that was still unconstitutional because it is a cruel and unusual punishment.
Thanks, Mike. I'm not that good with words. But how often does this happen?
Well, according to the National Association of Mental Health, 20% of people on death row have serious mental illnesses. Not only does this seem unconstitutional, but it also seems quite unethical to sentence someone who is not fully capable of understanding the world and their actions to death.
But they can always just plead insanity, right? And then get out of it and get the help that they need?
Unfortunately, less than 1% of cases that try to plead insanity are determined to be not guilty. Even Jeffrey Dahmer tried to plead insanity, but it didn't work.
As bad as these people may seem, and as guilty of their crimes as they may be, we should try to find ways to help them instead of simply killing them. This would give us a chance to learn more about those with severe mental illnesses who think wildly differently than those without. They don't perceive society's rules and constructs the same way that we do. Lawyer Brian Stevenson gives a good analogy for this. Just like how we would interact with a blind person keeping their disability in the back of our mind, we must do the same for those who are mentally disabled.
So, what are we doing? This case was a while ago, but I really hope that something has changed.
Well, Minnesota, the best state in the land, has less people overall reporting anxiety and depression, at 28.3% of the population, compared to 32.3% of the nationwide population. This is according to the Kaiser Family Foundation for Mental Health.
And a recent occurrence in Anoka, Minnesota sparked a lot of controversy. And from controversy comes change.
Ooh, what happened?
Some renters in Anoka discouraged their tenants, who had mental illnesses, from calling emergency services for help when they needed it. These renters even went so far as to revoke leases when mentally ill tenants did call for help.
Jeez, that's harsh.
But NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Health, which is a very powerful force in pushing agendas into law, responded by releasing a list of 2024 goals for Minnesota. They hope to increase funding of different programs that would help people with mental health issues. This includes programs to help mentally ill people before something tragic happens. Prevention is the best cure, after all.
There is still a lot of work to be done. 60% of people in the United States with mental health issues don't receive any treatment. Mental health institutes need to stop turning patients like Cecil Clayton away and start taking their cases more seriously.
Absolutely. So what can people like us do?
Never be quick to judge someone. Even people who appear perfectly fine on the outside could be going through something traumatic inwardly. We should all do our best to be kind and considerate of everyone.
That's how we can build a society that tackles the root of problems like mental illness, rather than one that's left to clean up the symptoms.
We seem to be getting a little better out of each day. Well, folks, from all of us at the Purple Brownie, thank you for listening. We are the MMA, Mike, and Alex, and we'd like to humbly remind you to keep an open mind. More often than not, there's more to life than the black and white. This episode was brought to you by the National Institute of Mental Health. The NIMH is the leading federal agency for mental health research. The NIMH is the largest scientific organization dedicated to research on the understanding, treatment, and prevention of mental illnesses. If you feel like making a change in the world, please donate today. Thank you.